Eli Turner had always believed he was strong enough to handle anything life threw at him, but that year proved him wrong in every way. The drought came early, stronger than anything the town had seen in decades. For months, not a single drop of rain touched the dry earth. The grass disappeared, the ponds shrank into muddy holes, and the sun felt like a hammer striking the land every day without mercy. Eli watched helplessly as his fields turned yellow. His cattle lost weight, and his ranch, his dream began to slip away. He tried everything he could to save it. He woke before sunrise, worked long after sunset, and rationed every drop of water he had. But the land was dry, the riverbed was dust, and his strength was fading. He lived alone on the ranch he inherited from his father, a place that had always brought him comfort. But now the walls felt empty, and every corner reminded him that he didn't have anyone to share the burden with. His nearest neighbor lived miles away, and the town was even farther. After weeks of fighting the dry weather, Eli reached a point where he barely had the energy to stand. His food was running low, the pantry shelves almost bare, and he hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. His stomach growled constantly, but he ignored it, focusing instead on trying to save whatever cattle he could. Each step he took around the ranch felt heavier than the last. Finally, one morning, when the heat felt too much to bear, Eli saddled his tired horse and decided to ride into town. He hoped to trade the last few things he had for enough food to survive one more week. It wasn't much of a plan, but he felt he had no choice left. The ride was long and rough, and the sun beat down on him the entire way. His vision blurred several times, and he had to stop often, leaning forward to catch his breath. The dust rose behind him with every step the horse took, and the hot wind stung his face. He reached the old mountain trail by late afternoon. It was a quiet path, far from the main roads, and most people avoided it because it was steep and lonely. But Eli chose it because it was shorter, and he didn't have the strength for the longer ride. His hands trembled on the reins, and his lips felt dry and cracked. By the time he reached the middle of the trail, his horse slowed down, sensing his weakness. Eli tried to urge it forward, but the world around him suddenly swayed. He blinked hard, trying to steady himself, but his body felt lighter and heavier at the same time, as if it no longer belonged to him. Within moments, the dizziness took over. His vision faded at the edges, turning the world into blurry shapes. He slid off his horse, his legs unable to carry his weight, and fell to his knees. He tried to stand but failed. The ground spun, and the heat pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. He whispered to himself that he just needed a moment, but his body didn't listen. His arms gave out, and he collapsed face down on the dry earth. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was the shadow of a tall figure moving toward him. When Eli opened his eyes again, he wasn't on the trail anymore. He was lying on a soft bed inside a small wooden cabin. He blinked a few times, confused, before realizing he had been rescued. His clothes were dry, his boots were off, and someone had placed a blanket over him. For a moment, he wondered if he was dreaming, but then he heard footsteps approaching. The door opened slowly, and a tall woman ducked slightly to enter the room. Eli had seen many people in his life, but he had never seen someone with her presence. She was tall, taller than most men, with broad shoulders, strong arms, and a calm, steady expression. Her long dark hair was tied back, and her clothing was simple but neat, showing the life of someone who worked hard every day. Her eyes were warm and observant, watching him to make sure he was awake. "You're finally up," she said softly, placing a tray on a small table beside him. "You gave me quite a scare on that trail." Her voice was steady, kind, and comforting. Eli swallowed hard, trying to sit up, but she lifted a hand gently. "Take it slow. You were dehydrated and starving. Rest first." Eli looked at her with confusion. "Who? Who are you? She smiled slightly. My name is Mara. Most people around here call me the widow who lives near the mountains. But you don't have to call me that. She handed him a cup of water. Drink. Eli drank the water gratefully, feeling the cool liquid ease his throat. Every sip felt like life returning to him. When he finally finished, Mara handed him a small bowl filled with warm stew. He hesitated for a moment. Out of habit, he wasn't used to accepting help, but hunger won. He took a spoonful and felt a warmth spread through his whole body. The taste was simple but comforting, filled with vegetables and meat he hadn't eaten in months. Mara watched quietly as he ate. Her expression wasn't one of pity, but of a person who understood hardship all too well. When he finally set the bowl down, she asked gently, "How long were you going without proper food?" Eli lowered his gaze. "Too long," he admitted quietly. "The drought hit my ranch hard. I was trying to keep things together, but I didn't have enough for myself." Mara nodded. "I guessed as much. You were barely conscious when I found you. You're lucky your horse didn't wander off." Eli looked up again. "How did you find me?" "I was gathering herbs near the trail," she said. "I noticed your horse standing still, and then I saw you on the ground. You were burning up from the heat." She paused and added softly, "I couldn't just leave you there." Her words were simple, but they carried sincerity. Eli felt a deep sense of gratitude, stronger than anything he had felt in a long time. He had been alone for so many months, fighting his battles in silence, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. He studied Mara again. Though many people might call her a giant widow, Eli saw something entirely different. He saw strength born from hardship, kindness shaped by experience, and a presence that filled the entire room without ever feeling heavy. "You saved my life," Eli said quietly. Mara gave a small smile. "I only did what anyone should do." But Eli knew not everyone would have done what she did. Many would have ridden past him out of fear or simply not wanting to get involved. Mara was different. She helped because she had a heart that wouldn't let her walk away. She stayed by his side for the rest of the afternoon, checking his temperature, making sure he drank enough water, and preparing more food. As the sun began to set, the cabin filled with warm, golden light. Eli watched her move around the kitchen area with practiced ease. She worked quietly, her footsteps soft despite her tall frame. There was something calming about her presence that he couldn't quite explain. When she sat down nearby, Eli finally asked, "Do you live out here alone?" "Yes," she answered. "My husband passed years ago. Since then, it's just been me and this place." Her eyes drifted toward the window. "I don't mind the solitude. It's peaceful." Eli nodded slowly. He understood that feeling better than most. He wanted to say something comforting but wasn't sure what words were right. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you again. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Mara looked at him, her eyes gentle but firm. "No man should starve on my land. If you need help again, you can come here without hesitation." Her words stayed with him long after she stepped outside to check on the firewood. As he rested in the quiet cabin, Eli felt a warmth settle in his chest, not just from the food, but from the simple kindness of a stranger. He looked around the room, noticing the neat shelves, the handmade blankets, the small wooden carvings near the window. Everything showed care, patience, and a steady hand. He didn't know it then. But this moment, this rescue, this simple act of kindness would shape the rest of his life. He would ride away in the morning, unsure whether he would ever see Mara again. But her calm strength, her gentle voice, and her kindness would stay with him through every hardship that followed. And years later, when their paths crossed once more, those memories would come back stronger than ever, changing the course of both their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. Eli Turner rode away from Mara's cabin the next morning, feeling stronger than he had in months. The cool morning breeze brushed against his face, and his horse walked steadily down the quiet trail. Behind him, smoke rose gently from the chimney of the widow's cabin, a small sign of life in the wide, empty land. Eli kept looking back, unable to stop himself. Something about Mara's kindness had touched a part of his heart he had forgotten existed. He didn't know if he would ever see her again. But the memory of her calm voice, her careful hands, and her warm meal stayed with him as he made his way down the mountain path. The drought continued for many more weeks, but Eli worked hard every day, remembering Mara's words that no one should starve on her land. Her kindness pushed him to keep fighting for his ranch. Slowly, he repaired fences, dug deeper wells, and even managed to trade for a bit of grain. He didn't have much, but he had enough to keep going. Life wasn't easy, but Eli had regained something more important than food hope. Months turned into years. Rain finally returned, filling the dry riverbeds, waking up the grass, and bringing color back to the land. Eli's ranch began to grow again. His cattle got healthy, and his fields regained life. People in town often said that Eli Turner had survived the worst drought in memory. Some said he was lucky. Others said he was stubborn. But only Eli knew the truth. He had survived that terrible time because a tall widow in the mountains had found him when he had nothing left. Even though years passed, Mara was never far from his thoughts. He often remembered the warm stew she cooked, the way she smiled gently, and how she stayed by his side until he had the strength to walk again. He wondered how she was doing. He wondered if she was still living alone in that quiet cabin, surrounded by the trees and mountains. Sometimes he wanted to visit her, but he stopped himself. He didn't want to intrude or make her uncomfortable. And maybe, in a quiet corner of his heart, he feared that she might not remember him the way he remembered her. But fate had its own way of bringing people together. One stormy night, several years after his rescue, lightning tore through the sky and thunder shook the land. Eli had been repairing a broken part of his barn roof earlier that day. But the storm arrived faster than expected. The wind howled like an angry beast, and rain poured down in heavy sheets. Eli rushed outside to check on his cattle, fighting the wind that pushed against him. The ground turned muddy beneath his boots, and thunder rolled again, loud enough to make the horses restless. He didn't notice the barn door swinging loose until it slammed open, scattering straw everywhere. He hurried to close it, gripping the heavy wood with both hands. But the wind was too strong. Rain soaked him from head to toe, turning his clothes cold and heavy. He struggled for a long moment, his arms shaking, until he finally forced the door shut and latched it. By the time he stepped back, he was drenched and shivering. His hat was gone, carried away by the wind. He checked his cattle quickly, counting each one, but one was missing. Eli didn't hesitate. Even though the storm was growing worse, he knew he had to find it. He grabbed a lantern, held it close to shield the flame from the wind, and began searching across his flooded fields. His boots sank into the mud, and every step felt heavier. Water dripped from his hair into his eyes, but he kept going, calling out for the missing animal. After an hour of searching, he spotted hoofprints leading toward the old mountain trail. He stared at the path, remembering the last time he had been there. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the dark trail for a split second. Eli took a deep breath and followed the prints. The higher he climbed, the colder it became. The rain fell faster, the wind stronger. His lantern flickered several times, almost dying out. But he protected it with his hand, determined not to lose its light. His heart pounded as he reached a bend in the trail. And suddenly, he spotted the missing cow huddled near a rock, frightened by the storm. Relief washed over him. He stepped closer, speaking softly to calm the animal. But just then, lightning struck a tree nearby, and the ground shook. The cow bolted up the path, forcing Eli to chase after it. His boots slipped on the wet stones, and he nearly fell several times. The cow ran until it disappeared around a bend near the familiar clearing where Mara's cabin stood. Eli stopped for a moment, breathing heavily, his lantern trembling in his hand. He had not been here since the day she saved him. The cabin door was closed, but warm light glowed from inside the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney, just like before. And though years had passed, Eli felt a strange comfort settling over him, as if the land itself welcomed him back. The cow stood near Mara's fence, shaking from the cold. Before he could approach it, the cabin door opened, and Mara stepped out, holding a lantern of her own. She looked almost exactly as he remembered, tall and strong, with calm eyes that held a quiet wisdom. But now, there were a few silver strands in her dark hair, and her expression looked more tired than before. Still, the moment she saw Eli, her eyes widened in surprise. "Eli Turner?" she called out over the wind. He felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the lantern in his hand. "Mara," he said, his voice almost carried away by the storm. "I didn't expect. I wasn't planning. The storm." "You're drenched," she said in a firm tone that sounded exactly like the woman who once saved his life. Eli nodded, grateful and overwhelmed. He guided the cow into her fenced area before following her inside. The moment he stepped into the cabin, the familiar warmth wrapped around him. Mara set her lantern down and immediately grabbed a dry cloth. "Sit," she said gently. Eli obeyed without argument. She removed his wet coat, handed him a thick blanket, and placed wood on the fire to warm the room further. As she moved around, Eli watched her quietly. She still had the same steady hands, the same careful movements, the same calm presence that made him feel safe. When she finally sat across from him, she studied his face with curious eyes. "It has been years," she said softly. "Yes," he replied. "Too many." A small smile touched her lips. "But you look stronger now, and healthier." Eli chuckled quietly. "I survived the drought. Barely. Your help was the reason I made it through." Mara looked surprised. "I only gave you food and water. You gave me more than that," he said. "You gave me hope when I had none left." She looked down at her hands, touched by the words. But before she could reply, the storm roared again outside, shaking the windows. Mara stood up and checked the door to make sure it was closed tightly. "You shouldn't ride back tonight," she said. "The storm will get worse." "I wasn't planning to," Eli admitted. "I didn't think I'd even make it this far." Mara returned to the table and placed a bowl of warm stew in front of him. The moment he tasted it, memories from years ago rushed back. He remembered arriving here nearly half dead, and how she had cared for him without hesitation. He remembered her quiet voice telling him he wasn't alone, even if she didn't say the words directly. As the storm continued outside, they talked for the first time in years, truly talked. Mara asked about his ranch, and Eli told her about the slow rebuilding, the new cattle he managed to raise, and the challenges he still faced. Mara listened with patience, nodding at the right moments, offering simple words of support. When it was his turn to ask about her, she hesitated before sharing that life had been both quiet and lonely. She helped travelers when she could, and provided food to nearby families during winter. But she spent most days working the land alone. Her voice was steady, but Eli heard the loneliness behind it. "You've done so much for others," he said gently. "You always have." She looked surprised by his words. "I just do what feels right." Thunder rolled again, but Eli barely heard it. He was too focused on the way her eyes softened when she talked, the way she looked down shyly whenever he complimented her, and the way her presence made the storm outside seem less frightening. Hours passed without either of them noticing. The storm finally began to weaken, and the wind grew quieter. Mara lit another lantern and placed it near the window. The warm glow filled the cabin, casting soft shadows across the wooden walls. "You can stay here tonight," she said quietly. "There's an extra room." Eli nodded, grateful. But before he went to rest, he paused near the doorway and looked back at her. She stood near the fire, adjusting the wood and making sure the flames stayed steady. Her face glowed softly in the warm light, her expression peaceful. It was in that moment that Eli realized something had begun to change inside him. Years ago, he had left this cabin carrying gratitude. Now he was leaving the room carrying something deeper, something he didn't have a name for yet. As he lay down in the spare room, listening to the fading storm outside, he knew one thing for certain. This time, he wouldn't let years pass before he saw her again. Something was pulling him toward her. Something stronger than the wind, stronger than the storm, and stronger than the fear that once kept him silent. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this night was only the beginning. When Eli woke the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world quiet and washed clean. Soft sunlight filtered through the window of the small room Mara had given him, and the smell of warm bread drifted through the cabin. For a long moment, he lay still, listening to the gentle crackle of the fire outside and the faint sounds of someone moving around the kitchen. His body felt heavy but warm, wrapped in a thick blanket. He hadn't slept this peacefully in years. He finally stood, stretched his shoulders, and stepped out into the main room. Mara was at the counter, her back to him, slicing fresh bread. Her tall frame moved steadily, and her long hair was tied back loosely. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard his footsteps, and her calm smile greeted him. "You slept well," she said softly. "I haven't slept that well in a long time," he admitted. She nodded, almost relieved. "Sit. Breakfast is ready." He took a seat at the small table, while she placed a warm pot of stew, fresh bread, and a jar of honey in front of him. She poured him hot tea, and finally sat across from him. They ate quietly at first, the morning light giving the room a peaceful glow. Eli watched her hands, strong, yet gentle, as she prepared her own plate. Every small movement she made told the story of someone who lived with patience and care. After a few minutes, Mara broke the silence. "Your cow is in the back field." She seems calm now. Eli smiled. "You've helped me twice now without hesitation." Mara shrugged lightly. "It's what anyone would do." Eli shook his head. "Not everyone, only you." Her eyes softened at his words, and for a moment she looked down, almost shy. It was rare to see her that way. Her strength was clear, but Eli could sense a quiet humility beneath it, like she didn't fully understand how special her kindness was. When breakfast was over, Eli offered to help with chores before heading home. Mara tried to refuse at first, saying he was still recovering from the storm. But Eli insisted. He stepped outside with her, breathing in the fresh, clean air. The mountains stood tall around them, the sky bright and clear. The world felt reborn after the heavy rain. Together, they repaired her fence, cleaned the barn, and checked on the animals. Mara worked with surprising ease, lifting heavy wood and moving tools as if they weighed nothing. Eli watched her with quiet admiration, not because of her height or strength, but because she carried those traits with grace. When he tried to lift something too heavy, she stepped close and helped without making him feel weak. They talked as they worked, learning more about each other than they had in the past years. Eli shared stories from his childhood, how his father taught him to ride, how he learned to fix fences before he learned to read, and how the ranch had been his home since he was small. Mara listened with genuine interest, smiling softly at the simpler memories. Mara shared parts of her life too. She talked about her husband with respect and warmth, explaining that they had built the cabin together. She didn't speak of his passing in detail, but the sadness in her voice told Eli everything he needed to know. She admitted that she had grown comfortable with solitude, even though it wasn't always easy. Eli listened closely. He felt her words sink deep into him, stirring something he couldn't name. Every time she looked at him, every time she laughed gently, the connection between them grew stronger, without either of them forcing it. By the time the sun reached the middle of the sky, they were both sitting on a log near the cabin, resting after hours of work. Mara poured them both water from a jug, and Eli watched her reflection in the metal cup. Her expression was peaceful, but there was something thoughtful in her eyes, as if she were wondering about something she didn't know how to say. "You should head home before it gets late," she finally said. "I will," he replied. "But I'd like to come back. If that's all right with you." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out toward the mountains, thinking. Then, slowly, she turned back to him. "You're welcome here anytime. Eli Turner." Her words felt warmer than the sun itself. Eli nodded, trying not to show how much it meant to him. Before leaving, he helped her stack the remaining firewood. When he mounted his horse, Mara stood at the edge of the clearing, her hands resting against her hips. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he replied. As he rode away, he looked back, again and again. Mara stood there until he disappeared down the trail, and the sight of her standing strong and alone stayed with him the entire ride home. Over the next several weeks, Eli found himself returning to Mara's cabin often. Sometimes, he came to bring her supplies she needed. Sometimes, he came to help with chores. Sometimes he came simply because he missed talking to her. And every time, she welcomed him with that quiet smile that made everything feel lighter. Little by little, a routine formed between them. Mara would open the door before he even knocked, sensing his arrival from the sound of horse hooves. She would offer him tea or food, and he would pretend he was only there to help. Not because he wanted to see her. They talked about everything: the weather, the ranch, the animals, life, hopes, fears. And with each conversation, Eli felt his heart growing attached to her in a way he never expected. Mara, too, began to change in small ways. She laughed more often, little soft laughs that warmed the room. She opened up to him, slowly but honestly, sharing thoughts she normally kept hidden. Eli noticed she listened to him closely, and she seemed to remember everything he said. When he mentioned he liked a certain herb in his food, she started using it. When he said he enjoyed the sound of rain on the roof, she told him stories of storms she had weathered alone before. Their bond deepened, not because either of them tried to force it, but because it grew naturally, quietly, like a seed rooted in kindness, finally reaching for the sun. Then winter arrived, harsher than usual. Snow covered the land for weeks, making travel difficult and dangerous. Eli's ranch struggled as temperatures dropped. The wind howled at night, and the cold settled into the walls of his home. One morning, as he stepped outside to check his cattle, he sensed something wasn't right. The animals were uneasy, the barn doors rattling, and the air felt sharp and heavy. He had a bad feeling, the kind that settled deep in his chest. He mounted his horse and headed toward Mara's cabin, worried she might be struggling in the severe cold. The journey was exhausting, the wind cutting across his face and numbing his fingers. Snow fell heavily, covering the trail and making it difficult to see. But Eli pushed through, knowing he needed to check on her. When he reached the clearing, smoke rose from Mara's chimney, but the snow around her cabin was deep, untouched. That meant she hadn't gone out at all. He hurried to the door and knocked. Mara opened it quickly, her breath visible in the cold air, her cheeks red from the chill. "Eli?" she said, surprised. "You came through this weather?" "I was worried," he said simply. Her expression softened. She stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. Inside, the fire was burning, but not strongly enough to warm the whole room. Eli immediately noticed the small stack of wood near the hearth, far too little to last through the coming nights. "You should have more wood than this," he said. "I was going to gather more," she replied with a calm voice. "Not in this weather," he said firmly. Mara looked at him for a moment, then nodded. She didn't argue because she knew he was right. Eli didn't waste a single moment. He put on his coat and stepped back outside, gathering wood from the pile behind the cabin. Snow covered everything, and the wind stung his eyes, but he carried armful after armful inside. Mara tried to help, but Eli insisted she stay warm. By the time he finished, his hands were numb, and his coat was heavy with snow. But a large stack of firewood sat beside the fireplace, ready for use. Mara stood silently, watching him with an expression he had never seen before, full of gratitude, worry, and something deeper. When he finally sat down near the fire, she handed him warm tea and placed a thick blanket over his shoulders. She sat beside him, closer than she had ever sat before. "You always help me," she said softly. "You helped me first," he replied. She looked into the fire for a long moment before speaking again. "I was alone. For so many years. I forgot what it felt like to have someone think of me." Eli turned to her and said quietly, "You don't have to be alone anymore." She looked up, surprised, as if unsure whether he meant those words. But Eli didn't pull back. He didn't change the subject. He let his words rest between them, warm and honest. That night, the snow fell heavier outside, but inside the cabin, something warmer than any fire began to grow. A closeness settled between them, gentle and steady, like two hearts finding comfort in the same quiet rhythm. As the winter months continued, Eli stayed at Mara's cabin more often, helping her through the harsh weeks. They cooked together, talked late into the nights, and learned each other's quiet habits, how Mara always hummed softly while cooking, how Eli always checked the windows twice before going to sleep. They shared simple moments, but those simple moments meant everything. By the end of winter, something in their lives had changed completely, even if neither had spoken it aloud yet. Their bond was no longer just friendship. It was something deeper, something warm, something that made both of them look toward spring with quiet hope. And though they hadn't said the words yet, both of them knew. The next season would bring a change neither could ignore. Spring arrived slowly, melting the last traces of snow from the mountains and warming the land that had been frozen for months. The trees began to show fresh green leaves. The air carried the soft smell of earth, and the rivers, silent all winter, started to flow again. Eli Turner felt the change deeply. It wasn't just the season shifting. Something inside him had also begun to open. Like the land awakening after winter. He felt it every time he thought about Mara. He felt it every time he remembered the winter nights they spent, talking beside the fire. When the snow finally cleared enough to travel safely, Eli returned to his ranch to check on his land. The cattle had survived with the help of the supplies he had prepared earlier, but the fences needed repair, the barn needed fixing, and months of snow had left the ranch looking tired. Still, Eli worked with a sense of strength he hadn't felt in years. Every piece of wood he lifted, every nail he hammered, every fence he repaired, carried a quiet determination. He wanted to make his ranch strong again, not just for himself, but for the future he was beginning to imagine. He visited Mara often during those first weeks of spring. Sometimes he brought food from town. Sometimes he brought tools. Sometimes he brought nothing at all, only his presence, because that was enough for both of them. Mara welcomed him every time with a warm smile and the simple comfort of her quiet company. She continued her daily routines, working the land, gathering herbs, carving wooden tools, but her steps seemed lighter, her eyes softer, and her laughter more frequent when Eli was around. There were moments when they said very little, just sitting together near the river or tending to her small garden. Yet silence never felt empty between them. It felt peaceful, like a place where words didn't need to fill every second. Eli found himself seeking that peace more and more. Mara, too, seemed to settle into a new rhythm, one that included Eli in almost every part of her day. One afternoon, Eli helped Mara repair the roof of her shed. He climbed the wooden ladder, while Mara handed him tools from below. After a while, he noticed she wasn't handing up the next tool. He leaned over to see why and found Mara staring at him with a thoughtful expression. Her tall frame stood steady, but her eyes held a quiet confusion, as if she was trying to understand something she had never felt before. "Something on your mind?" Eli asked gently. Mara hesitated before answering. "You've been coming here a lot, even now that winter has ended." Eli smiled. "Do you want me to stop coming?" Her head snapped up quickly, eyes widening. "No, I didn't say that." He climbed down the ladder slowly and stood in front of her. "Then what are you trying to say?" Mara looked down at her hands, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "I'm not used to someone choosing to stay by my side. I've lived alone for so long that I forgot how to expect companionship." Eli stepped closer, but not too close, just enough so she knew he was listening. "I'm not here because I feel sorry for you. And I'm not here because of the storm. I come because I want to be here." Her eyes lifted, and for the first time, Eli saw something raw and vulnerable in them, something she had probably hidden for years behind her strength. Spring continued to warm the land, and their bond grew like the blooming flowers around them. They shared meals, exchanged stories, and even started rebuilding a small garden behind Mara's cabin. Mara taught Eli how to identify useful plants, and Eli showed her how to reinforce the fence to keep animals safe. Every day they worked side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, their eyes meeting briefly, each moment stirring something deeper. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with soft orange and pink, Eli invited Mara to visit his ranch. She hesitated at first, unsure if she would be comfortable leaving her familiar land, but he reassured her gently, promising to show her only what she wished to see. After some thought, she agreed. The next morning, Mara rode her horse down the mountain trail behind Eli. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of pine trees and fresh soil. When they reached Eli's ranch, Mara's eyes widened slightly as she looked around. She had never seen it up close before. The land was wide, open, and peaceful, with rolling fields and a wooden barn that Eli had recently repaired. Eli dismounted first and helped her down. Though she could easily climb off without support, she allowed him to help anyway, and the warmth of her hand lingered longer than either expected. He led her around the ranch, showing her the places he had rebuilt after the drought and the parts he still planned to improve. When they reached the barn, he paused. He pushed the door open and revealed the inside. The wood beams were strong and newly polished. The floor was clean, and fresh hay filled the corners. Mara walked inside slowly, her eyes scanning the space. Eli watched her, unsure of what she would think. "This is impressive," she said finally, her voice filled with quiet admiration. "You rebuilt all this?" "With my own hands," he answered. "And with the strength I gained after meeting you." She turned to him, surprised. Eli took a slow step toward her. "During the drought, I didn't think I would make it. My spirit was tired. My hope was gone. But you saved me not just by feeding me, but by reminding me that kindness still existed in the world." Mara's face softened, but her eyes filled with emotion, as if she didn't know how to receive such sincere words. "And in the winter," Eli continued, "when the cold was harsh and the nights were long, it was being near you that kept me strong." The barn fell silent except for the soft sound of the wind outside. Mara looked at him, her breath catching slightly. She wasn't used to hearing such deep words directed at her. She had always lived quietly, away from the eyes and judgments of others. Having someone speak to her heart so openly felt both overwhelming and beautiful. Eli stepped even closer, the warm light of the afternoon falling across both of them. "Mara," he said gently, "you've given me more than you know." She swallowed, her voice soft but steady. "You've given me something too. Something I thought I would never feel again." "What's that?" Eli asked quietly. "Company," she whispered. and a reason to look forward to each day. Eli's heart warmed at her words. He reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She didn't. Her hand trembled slightly in his, but she didn't let go. They stood like that for a moment. Hands joined, both aware that this simple touch carried the weight of every moment they had shared. The sun lowered, filling the barn with a golden glow. Eli gently guided Mara outside, leading her toward the fence line that overlooked the wide meadow. The sky stretched endlessly before them, painted in soft colors that looked almost unreal. They walked side by side, their shoulders brushing occasionally. When they reached the fence, they leaned against it silently. Mara looked out at the land, her eyes shining with the reflection of the setting sun. Eli watched her for a long moment, studying the way the light softened her features, the way the gentle wind brushed her hair, and the way her presence made everything feel calmer. She turned to him suddenly, as if sensing his gaze. "Why do you look at me that way?" she asked softly. Eli took a deep breath. His heart felt full, too full to keep his feelings hidden any longer. He stepped closer, just enough so she could feel the warmth of his presence. "Mara," he whispered, "there's something I need to say. Something I've been holding in for a long time." Her eyes widened slightly, and she waited, silent and still. Eli looked into her eyes, eyes that had saved him once, eyes that had comforted him through winter, eyes that had slowly become the safest place he knew. He leaned just a little closer. "I choose you," he whispered. The moment the words left his lips, Mara froze. Her breath caught, her eyes growing softer, wetter, as if those 3 simple words had touched a place deep inside her that she had kept hidden for years. The wind brushed past them gently, as if the world itself paused to listen. For a long moment, she didn't move or speak. Eli didn't step back. He let her feel the truth in his words, let her see the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, her fingers tightened slightly around the fence rail. She looked at him with a tenderness he had never seen before. Slowly, she lifted her hand and placed it over his. Her touch was gentle, but full of emotion. "Eli," she whispered back, her voice trembling softly, "you are welcome in my life." The words washed over him with a warmth stronger than any fire. A quiet, deep joy settled in his chest. They didn't embrace, didn't kiss, didn't rush the moment. They simply stood together, hands joined, hearts steady, letting the evening light wrap around them like a promise. Eli knew, in that peaceful silence, that everything had changed. And Mara, standing beside him, knew it too. She wasn't alone anymore, not in the mountains, not in her heart. The man who had once arrived at her cabin half-conscious from hunger had returned years later, not as someone in need, but as someone choosing her fully, openly, and honestly. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, they walked back toward the cabin side by side, their steps slow and calm, as if they had all the time in the world. Because now, they did.